Welcome back to RoadMiles. I'm Nick Peters. It's been a little while since we've had the opportunity to talk and for me to share some thoughts in a longer form episode. It's actually been a full year since I launched RoadMiles. And it's been a full year since I ran my third of 3 back-to-back marathons. It's also been a year since I started a bit of a medical health journey after suffering a miniature stroke, losing a little bit of vision in an eye, and discovering that I had a cardiovascular condition that required a little more very careful attention. Many more things have happened during this past year. But in the context of RoadMiles, I wanted to come back to an important theme. And I'd like to frame it as not stepping back, but resetting. What does it mean to reset and approach life with a mindset that is focusing on what I'd like to set up as 3 contrasts for you? I want us to think about trusting versus thinking. I want us to think about satisfaction, not speed. And I want to think about movement, not motion. What does all that mean? Trust versus thinking. Satisfaction versus speed. Movement versus motion. So let's come back to, a year ago today. Launching RoadMiles. I remember ordering the microphone you see here, or that you hear me on if you're listening. I think it was the first piece of equipment that I actually ordered for RoadMiles. And I remember plugging it in and just trying to learn how to use it and thinking, why would anyone want to hear my voice? What's the point in creating yet another podcast in a world where there's millions of them? So I laid down a music track and I just started talking. And I realized that it wasn't something I was doing for other people to listen to. It was something I was doing for me. The satisfaction that I got just in engaging in the creative process and learning to share thoughts in this format was something I'd never experienced before, and I was happy to do it if anyone listened or if no one listened. And so RoadMiles was born, and I remember thinking, how do I want to approach RoadMiles? Is it about interviewing people and asking questions, friends, family, thought leaders? Is it about doing what I'm doing right now and just sharing some thoughts and offering those out in a format that I hope people will take with them while they're on their journey down life's road, out in the world, running miles, walking miles, driving miles? Or is it some combination of the two? And it's turned out to be a combination of the two. I've had a few great opportunities to share thoughts with you, and I've had some incredible conversations, one of which was dropped as an interview episode with my dear friend, Dave Manley. And I'm looking forward to sharing a couple more in-depth interviews that are in progress now. As I pivoted towards developing a theme for the next phase of RoadMiles and spending some time on this episode, choosing a different pace is something that evolved as its own story. So I want to just tell you a little bit about my running history. I started running ad hoc probably 10 or 12 years ago, but only seriously 4 or 5 years ago. And when I got more into a serious running cadence, I realized it was something I truly enjoyed because I could really get out of my head in a way that I haven't done with other exercise. Or running is something I could do and almost get into a bit of a trance. I was a slow runner when I first started. Quite honestly, I was lucky to break a 7.5 minute per kilometer pace or worse. And I don't think, I had great control over my breathing or just a sustainable approach to running long distances. I could do 5-7 kilometers, no problem. But those were big runs for me. 10K was a significant run. Anything over 10K would have seemed like a mini marathon for me at the time. And then, 3.5 years ago, after getting to a place with my running where I thought I was making good progress, thanks to Peloton and thanks to a ton of lifestyle changes that I made following the pandemic, cleaned up my eating tremendously, stopped drinking alcohol, and started managing emotional and psychological parts of myself that I had never managed before, seeking therapy, talking to others, making some of the most life-changing improvements I think I've ever made. I found myself in a place where running was actually something I could achieve at a more elite level than I'd ever thought about. And so I remember I was actually having breakfast with my family at a restaurant, and I thought, I want to run a marathon. And I started looking at the Calgary Marathon website, and on a whim, I registered myself in the race. And I thought, if I don't sign up for this and just try it, just do it, I'll never actually run a marathon. And so I did. I signed up for the race, and I realized after I'd signed up that I probably had less than 6 weeks to race day. Now, keep in mind, this is, at the time, someone who maintained a good pace, probably was getting closer to the 6 minutes per kilometer zone on a lot of my pacing. But certainly was not experienced in any distances over 15, 17 kilometers. A marathon is 42 kilometers. And that's a big change. That's a very big change. My first training runs were in the community near where I live in Cochrane, Alberta. And I remember running up essentially the shoulder of the highway. I hadn't yet discovered the river trails that I love to run, that I'll be going out to run in just a few minutes here. And I just remember thinking, why am I doing this? My first few training runs, I immediately went to the 15-plus distance and asked any serious amateur marathon runner how they structure their training. And they will tell you they structure their training. They follow a program. They work incremental distances. They move from pace and interval distances to sustained efforts to long distance runs. They mix up their grade and their approach. They're mindful of their nutrition, their hydration, their electrolytes. I did none of that. I just started running. And I started covering distances that were challenging for me. and I didn't take rest days. And I decided that just once before the actual race, I would do the full 42-kilometer distance to see how my body handled it. And I remember placing some Gatorade bottles at the halfway mark. I structured it as basically 2 big out and backs so that I could cache some nutrition right near my start, near the house. Do, 20 kilometers or so as an out and back, replenish some of the hydration from Gatorade, and do another 20 kilometers. I remember coming back from that 42-kilometer distance feeling like I was going to die. I came into the house, I laid down on the living room floor, the hardwood floor, which was cool and dry and flat, and I stayed there for at least half an hour. My family was making sure I was alive, and they were being very kind and offering me rehydration and some food. I think I did a bit of a cold ice bath, then a warm shower, started to recover. And I found myself thinking, what have I done here? Am I actually going to make it through 42 kilometers on a race day that is 3 weeks away or less? And I realized I had to change my training approach a little bit, but that there just wasn't the time to structure it properly. So working with Peloton race preparation and other great online sources for first-time marathoners, I was able to do some interval training, medium distances and longer distances on a bit of a rotation schedule between that point and race day. And I think it helped because when race day arrived, I actually felt like my body had experienced the full range of running emotions that a person could experience when doing that kind of a distance and participating in a real race. So finally, race day did arrive. And I remember the emotions that were running through my brain and my body. Actually, the night before the race, I don't think I slept much. I was incredibly nervous about it. I thought, well, what have I done here? Am I actually going to make it through? And I arrived at the marshalling area. I had had my oatmeal and some peanut butter and electrolyte salts and water and probably way too much caffeine, a lot of coffee. I made my first pre-race porta potty mad dash, completely new to the whole world of race day porta potties, and found my place in the starting queue in the corral that was lining up with my estimated time, which actually turned out to be relatively accurate. And I just, I found myself alone with my thoughts. I had my playlist, my music, and my water. And I had made plans to stop at some aid stations along the way. I think I brought a few gels, but I hadn't thought through my nutrition in any real depth. And the race started, and I felt like this was something that was actually happening. I finished the race in 4 hours and 1 minute. And I can tell you that it was the hardest thing I'd ever done in my entire life. This was my finisher medal. So if you're on video, I'm looking at the chip on the back at the 4 hour, 1 minute mark. And the fact that I earned this is and was for me one of the most significant points of pride for a physical task and a mental task, and really an achievement that I've ever experienced. But it was hard. It started out well, and I think any runner that's done a first-time race can tell you that doing the full 42 kilometers is a journey of varying emotions. You start out thinking, I can do this. The pace is great. I'm feeling incredible. You hit a 10-kilometer mini wall. You start to rehydrate. You have some gels. You have some nutrition. You keep going. You think, okay, this is familiar. I'm at the 15-kilometer mark. My parents had come down to support me. My wife, my 2 kids had come down. They had placed themselves at a couple very key intervals along that first half to cheer me on, and I was thrilled to see them. And then I had turned around at the 20-kilometer mark, 21-kilometer mark, and was starting the return loop, given that the race was an out and back. And I hit the wall of all walls at about kilometer 30. And I remember it was a hot day, full sun, mid-May in Calgary, but there had also been quite a few wildfires and an early start to the wildfire season in Alberta. So the air did have some smoke in it. And I think, honestly, my lungs had been battered by training outdoors and smoke in the weeks prior. But I hadn't managed my nutrition. The idea of salt, pills or dissolved salt as electrolytes or anything like that had just not occurred to me. And I just felt it in my body at that point. I'd been hydrating. I'd stopped at some aid stations for a few electrolytes, but I wasn't doing anything to recalorify, if that's a word. And I was feeling it. I don't think I ever contemplated stopping a race. But I did question whether or not I'd physically make it to the finish line. I was in pain. My feet were numb, and I honestly could barely see. But, nearing the downtown core of Calgary again, entering the final pathway segment along the Bow River and nearing the Center Street Bridge, I think probably at that point 5 kilometers to go, I just thought to myself, I've done this. I've come this far. There's absolutely no reason I can't finish it. I'm not bleeding out of an organ. I'm not having a cardiac event. I haven't lost a limb. I haven't passed out. There's no one giving me medical attention. So why not keep going? And if any of those things did happen, there's an incredible support system on site to help. So I kept going, and I made it to the finish line. And I remember crossing it, collapsing, seeing my entire family there, drinking all this water, but not being able to satisfy my thirst, which now that I look back on it was an indicator of the level of full system dehydration that I actually had. And then later receiving this medal. And looking at the 4-hour time, which for my, over 40 age group at the time was significant. And I was very proud of it. And I actually got on the Peloton bike the next day to keep my legs moving. And I ran a few days later. I don't think I actually took a rest day following the marathon. And I can tell you now that in the training schedule that I followed before that race, I don't think I took any rest days. Even my shakeout run the day before was at least 5 or 7 kilometers. So some takeaways from that first race include lessons learned around nutrition and hydration. Hadn't done it properly, paid the price for it. Lessons around overtraining and a compressed training schedule. Starting too close to race day and not pacing my distances. But I think aside from the things I just mentioned, which are easy to criticize and they're mistakes that any new runner might make, my biggest takeaway was that I didn't realize until about 3 or 4 weeks after the race that the entire experience had changed me as a person forever. I was a runner now. I had completed my first marathon and I had credibility in the running community. I could legitimately throw that down as a humble brag anytime I spoke with a fellow runner. And there is an ego boost that happens when you casually drop in conversation to someone that you've run a marathon. And, it's an impressive thing to do. And I was very much into the idea of taking credit for that. So it was a lot of fun to be able to legitimately tell people that I'd completed my first marathon. The other thing that sunk in for me 3 or 4 weeks after the race was that there was clearly an aspect of my personality, my psyche, just the nature of me as a person, that was being fed by the race energy and the training for the race, and not always in a healthy way. The idea of achieving something that significant, striving for a pace or a time or a result, that's something that can interact with a perfectionist streak that anyone might have. And if you're even just mildly an obsessive type, or someone that wants to keep grinding away at something until you get a result, if you have standards that you hold yourself to that are unrelenting and goalposts that are always moving, which I do, and training for and completing a marathon, especially your first, is something you have to be careful with. And I hadn't even fully appreciated that at the time. What I did do was immediately decide I wanted to do it again. And by the time a month had passed, I had registered for the next year's race. And I told myself that I was going to spend the next 11 months training for that race, but in a more measured way and over a gradual program that just wouldn't stop, so that there'd be no rushed or last minute lead up to the race day, and so that I would feel like I had done the maximum possible amount in a year to get myself race ready for my second marathon. And you know what? It worked.